the Cyprus Research Center, and the Open University of Cyprus. Professor Michaelides was born in Nicosia and studied history of art and archaeology at the University of London. He has worked in Italy, principally at the British School at Rome. In 1982, he was appointed archaeological officer for the district of Paphos at the Cyprus Department of Antiquities. He joined the University of Cyprus in 1992 as Associate Professor of Classical Archaeology and was promoted to Professor in 2000, a position from which he retired in 2014. He was the first head of the Department of History and Archaeology, 96-2000, and Director of the Archaeological Research Unit, 96-2014. He has directed excavations at ancient Vereniki, Benghazi in Libya, Otranto in southern Italy, and the Basilica of San Clemente in Rome. He directed the excavation of the House of Orpheus and that of the Four Seasons, as well as the baths of the Triton in Paphos. He also carried out numerous salvage excavations of all periods in Paphos and the district. For the University of Cyprus, he co-directed the survey program Ποταμιά Άγιος Σωζόμενος and still directs the excavation and study projects at the early Christian site of Agii Pente of Hieroskipou and of the Roman House of Orpheus in Paphos. He has presented his research at over 150 international conferences and has given numerous lectures in Europe, the Near East, North Africa, the United States of America, and Australia. He has published over 170 scientific articles and is the author, editor, or co-editor of 20 books. The main fields of his research include Hellenistic and Roman mosaics, opus sectile, and wall paintings of the Mediterranean, the history of medicine, ancient Cypriot funerary architecture, the archaeology of Nea Paphos, and the topography of Nicosia. He is the vice president of the Association Internationale pour l'étude de la Mosaïque Antique and president emeritus of the International Committee for the Conservation of Mosaics after being president for 18 years. He is the national delegate in the International Society for the History of Medicine and is a member of the board of several national and international foundations and societies. He's a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of London, and in 2015 he was honored by the President of the Italian Republic with the title of Grande Ufficiale della Stella d'Italia. In 2019, he was one of the 12 elected founding members of the Cypriot Academy of Sciences, Letters, and Arts. Dear Professor Michaelides, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody, and Christos Anesti to those of you that celebrated Easter last Sunday, the Orthodox Easter. Thank you, Sophocles, for this over-generous introduction. And thank you, Sophocles, Director of the Center of Cultural Heritage, as well as my other colleague, Yorgos Deligiannakis, Associate Professor at the Open University of Cyprus, for kindly inviting me to talk to you tonight. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay. In my younger days, especially when I was living in Rome, I worked a lot on marble identification, something that started as part of my research on opus sectile. I was fortunate enough to apprentice, so to speak, with some of the then leading figures in marble studies, and it was then that I first came across Raniero Gnoli's Marmora Romana, a book that opened a new world to me and accompanies me ever since. Returning to Cyprus after living in, returning to Cyprus after living in Rome, I was struck, not to say shocked, for the first time realizing how very poor the island is in marble sculpture, architecture, and marble artifacts in general. Of course, Rome was a caput mundi, and few places in the world would compare with its wealth. However, the limited use of marble on the island is apparent when compared even with our neighboring regions in the Eastern Mediterranean, and surprising when we consider that these include Asia Minor and Egypt, that together with the mainland and island Greece furnished marble most parts of the ancient world. After this first reaction, I returned to the examination and the collection of information on the marble artifacts surviving on the island, and I would like to think that I now understand better the situation. I underline that I am not a geologist, and my knowledge is empirical and largely based on the macroscopic examination of the different stones. The idea about giving a talk on the use of marble in ancient Cyprus came to me following discussions with my friend and colleague, Professor Charalabos Bagitsis, and the direct question, is there Cypriot marble, coming from another friend, Paschalis Papapetro. Also involved in the discussions was yet another friend, the geologist Dr. Yorgos Konstantinou. And as some of you may know, these discussions resulted in Paschalis' documentary, Peri Kypriakou Marmarou, that came out a few weeks ago. My immediate response to Paschalis' question, is there Cypriot marble, was no, all ancient marble artifacts found on the island are imported. Of course, as I mentioned, I am not a geologist and I stand to be corrected. Through the discussions that followed, I have now learned that indeed there is local Cypriot marble. However, to what extent and how this was used in ancient times remains, in my judgment, very questionable. What I'm certain of is that Cyprus has no white statuary marble, and I hope that during my talk, you will understand the reasons that lead me to this conclusion. I will also discuss why I also think that most of the colored stones used on the island are imported, not local. And it is for this reason that I have entitled my talk, Marble in Ancient Cyprus, and not Ancient Cypriot Marble. Generally speaking, the study of ancient marbles is riddled with problems, which leave many issues unresolved, more so in Cyprus, where the examination of ancient marble is still in its infancy. One global, so to speak, problem is the fact that although research on marble provenance has made great leaps forward in recent decades, given the plethora of small and not so small quarries active through most of the ancient world, it is still difficult to identify with certainty many of the marbles used, especially the white and gray ones, except of course those that come from well-known and well-studied quarries. Terminology is also a problem, but before I discuss that, I need to make a short digression. After the end of the ancient world and the breakdown of organized marble trade, the tradition of marble working remained alive in several centers, but mainly in Rome, where the seemingly inexhaustible quantities of marble columns, capitals, veneering, and so on, from the ruined but also standing ancient buildings with which the city was littered. These pieces, the marble used there was being constantly recycled by the marmorari, the marble workers. Added to this spolia, there were also the large deposits of unworked blocks of marble. I don't know why it's not moving forward. Okay. As I said, there were also the large blocks of unworked marble, which had come to Rome in antiquity and waited to be used or were never used, as in the case of what you see on the screen, in a store on the banks of the Tiber known as the Marmorata. All this material, as I said, was being recycled non-stop. One only has to mention the characteristic church furnishings and pavements made by the Cosmati family and their followers in the late medieval period, and the multitude of over ornate churches of the Renaissance and Baroque Rome, all using recycled ancient marbles. And this is a tradition that continued right up to the 20th century. For example, when in 1934, the architect Florestano di Fausto expanded and refurbished the celebrated jewelers, Bulgari, in Rome, he framed the central doorway and the 4 large display windows with ancient Greek green Africano marble cornices. And there are more spolia reused inside the shop itself. And the mention of Africano prompts me to add that it is to the Marmorari that knew nothing about marble provenance that we owe many of the fancy names commonly used today for the different types of marble. Africano, for example, that I just mentioned, is the richly colored stone coming from Teos in Asia Minor, which has nothing to do with Africa, but was given this name because of its generally dark hues. This was one of the most popular marbles of the ancient world, but it is only rarely found in Cyprus. There are, however, 2 splendid pieces in Paphos, the one on the screen, which comes from Aios Georgios of Peia, the Basilica, and a much larger cornice from the Polish excavations in Paphos. Giallo Antico, ancient yellow, is a beautiful marble from the quarries of Chemtou in Tunisia, which you see here during a visit with students of the University of Cyprus in 2010. Rosso Antico, ancient red, not the drink, but the stone, is the red marble coming mainly, well, one of the biggest quarries is on Cape Tenaron in the Peloponnese, but there are other quarries in the general area that produce a similar marble. And there is plenty of Rosso Antico in Cyprus. Cipollino from Charistos in Evia in Greece, which was quite popular in Cyprus, so named because of its layered aspect reminiscent of a cut onion. Cipolla in Italian is onion. And there is also marmo cipolla and cipollaccio that describe several marbles that when being worked, when they're being cut, they give out an ugly smell of onion or leek. So these are all the names that we still use often due to the Marmorari of Rome. So back to terminology. Geologically speaking, marble is a metamorphic rock composed of recrystallized carbonate minerals, most commonly calcite and dolomite. The term marble usually refers to metamorphosized limestone, but in the language of the Marmorari, and from there on into the language of stonemasons in general, marble has a much broader meaning, encompassing a metamorphosized limestone and any stone that has the right hardness and can be cut, worked, and polished. And this, of course, includes granites, porphyries, and other stones, which are certainly not marbles. The situation with terminology gets worse when we come to Cyprus. Marbaro in Greek is the word for marble. In the Cypriot dialect, however, it refers almost exclusively to a type of soft crystalline alabastrine gypsum, widely used from prehistoric times on, mostly for the making of paving tiles, which remained the favorite of the wealthier classes right up to the 20th century. In most cases, the tiles are simple rectangles, but there are also exceptional pieces like floors like the ones you see on the screen. This is a generally soft and weak stone, and the very prominent laminations make it essentially unusable in architecture and sculpture. Here you see how badly it weathers, even in this relatively recent reliefs above two of Nicosia's Venetian gates. Of course, the reliefs are not Venetian, but Ottoman, but you can see how badly they weather when exposed. The other dialect word we use in Cyprus for marble is jonin, but this never refers to the gypsum, the marmaron I just talked about. I guess in English, it would be the equivalent of statuary and architectural marble. The etymology testifies to this, since it derives from the Greek word kion, meaning column. And the term is used when referring to columns and statues, only marble columns and statues, and also for describing something truly white, like in the popular "Τα βυζούθια σου τα θκυο εν άσπρα σαν το τζόνι." Your two little breasts are white like marble. Agos Hadjoannou, in his etymological lexicon of the Cypriot dialect, goes further, explaining the word jonin as meaning specifically pentelic marble used for making columns. Such strict definition of provenance is certainly wrong, but it underlines the whiteness implied by the word jonin, and most importantly, stresses the foreign origin of white marble. Another problem we encounter when examining Cypriot stone marble, and I think it is interesting to point this out, is the fact that although the ancient written sources are very informative on the minerals of Cyprus, they are silent with regard to its decorative stones. In modern times, the geology of Cyprus has been thoroughly studied by the Geological Survey Department, most notably by Yorgos Konstantinou and Ioannis Panagiidis. And that is how I learned that there is local marble in Cyprus. What still needs to be done, however, is a close examination of the ancient artifacts in direct relation to the local geology. In fact, if we put aside incidental references to the material some statues and columns are made of, there is no systematic study of the material evidence. With my friend and colleague since my Rome days, who I know is following now, Federico Guidobaldi, we have been talking of starting a study of the columns of ancient Cyprus since many, many years, but we have never got round to doing it yet, at least. I hope we still might make it. So today, the only general study of colored marbles in Cyprus is Fabrizio Antonelli's Sulla Presenza. You can read the title, I don't need to read it out to you. But as you can see, the title clearly states that this is a nota preliminare. There is, moreover, the study of some of the granite columns found on Cyprus, which you also see on the screen. When we look at the situation regarding white marble, the evidence points to a foreign origin, despite the fact that, geologically speaking, there are local white marbles. However, those quarries that can still be examined show that these marbles are far too hard to be sculpted using ancient tools, or too fragmented, thus too weak, to be used for columns or anything that could carry any weight. Of course, small columns are possible, but I'm talking about large columns, like the ones we see in the monuments of Cyprus. One could claim that the ancient quarries that gave good quality white marble were exhausted and have disappeared altogether, or that they were obliterated when dynamite was used for extracting irregular pieces of marble in modern times to be used in making placakia, the marmarines. All the same, I cannot believe that they all disappeared without a trace. And as we will see shortly, there are further arguments supporting the foreign origin of marble statues found on the island. The same, I believe, is valid for the use of local colored stones, certainly for use in sculpture and architecture. For example, the ancient Cypriots knew and appreciated the mainly pink hues of the recrystallized limestone of the Mansoura, of the Mamonia formation, but only used it for making large, heavy statue bases, but not for making any artifacts out of them, because they knew that this stone, beautiful though it is, was unsuitable for making columns, being very fragmented and not very strong. Although I should say that the stone is sometimes used for cruste in opusectile floors. Having discussed some of the information relating directly to Cyprus, let us see what was happening elsewhere. Given the widespread use of marble almost everywhere in the Mediterranean, what follows is certainly a very superficial survey. However, comparing what's happening elsewhere with what we have in Cyprus gives some interesting results. Mainland and island Greece, Asia Minor, and Italy were the main producers of white marbles. Colored marbles were also extracted from many quarries there, and Egypt, of course, exploited its rich array of granites, porphyries, and other stones since pharaonic times. In Greece, white, off-white, and gray marbles were used very early on for architecture and sculpture, and even containers and utensils. Suffice it to mention the Cycladic world, which of course uses marble in its full glory, white marble. By comparison, the use of colored stones was very limited, although it too was used, like in the facade of such an important structure as the treasury of Atreus, the Mycenaean treasury of Atreus, the facade being animated by reliefs of Rosso Antico and a green stone quarried near Sparta. What followed later during the Archaic and Classical periods with Kuroi and Kore, and culminating with the architecture and sculpture of the Parthenon, is too well known to merit discussion. It was there that the full potential of the excellent marble from nearby Pendeli was put into abundant use and is potentially fully realized, both in architecture and sculpture. But when we turn to Cyprus during these same periods, we realize that nothing of the kind was happening. There is no white marble or other marble architecture, and the sculpture is of local limestone, which does not have the potentials that good marble has. This, I think, is one of the reasons that, apart from the many limestone sculptures, the Cypriots resorted to the creation of the composite and absolutely colossal terracotta figures like those from Damassos and Maratheri. And of course, when we think of the sanctuary of Agia Irini with its hundreds of large and small figures, they are all made of of terracotta. There is no stone or marble used in what is certainly an important sanctuary. Think of the Cesnola collection in the Metropolitan Museum. Cesnola collected the creme de la creme of Cypriot antiquities that he could lay his hands on, but all the prime pieces of sculpture are made of local limestone. Although marble architecture remained absent from Cyprus until perhaps Hellenistic, if not Roman times, finished marble artifacts began to be imported in the island during the Archaic period. These are really sporadic and stick out from amongst the locally produced works. They become only a little more numerous during the Classical period and a bit more so, but remain always few in number during the Hellenistic. The early ones are usually in the form of funerary stele and sometimes official inscriptions. One such stele is that of Stasis, son of Stasiikos, of around 400 BC, found at Marion, which you see on the screen, made of Pentelic marble, which has many Attic characteristics. As time goes by, a variety of such exceptional objects gets imported, but it is always a case of one of or a handful of each type. Here is a random selection. An Attic funerary lion of the Classical period, reused in Roman times within the city of Nea Paphos, made of Pentelic marble and coming from a well-known workshop in Piraeus, or certainly near Athens, if not Piraeus itself. The superb Amazon sarcophagus, which was in Cyprus, but is now in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, made of fine-grained marble and attributable to the last quarter of the 4th century. And here is another proto-Hellenistic example, the unique for Cyprus Amazonomachy, the Amazonomachy frieze from Soli. Such architectural friezes decorate funerary monuments in Asia Minor and elsewhere, and also small temples, such as that of Athena Nike on the Parthenon. And it is important to stress that both these types of buildings are unusual, not to say unknown, in the architecture of Cyprus. Not only the material, but also the art of such objects is so alien to Cyprus that even high-quality imitations by local artists in local stone remain unmistakably Cypriot. One such example is a funerary stele of about 420 BC of Aristila, daughter of Onasas, that comes from Marion. It is made of hard Cypriot limestone and has many Attic features. However, despite the high quality of the carving, it remains a characteristically Cypriot work, and nobody can mistake it for an Attic stele. One exception in this respect is a superb head from Arsos, which, although carved in Cypriot limestone, has nothing to envy from imported marble sculpture. In the words of Cornelius Vermeulen, quote, "By the time one reaches the beautiful, sensitively profiled, veiled female head from Arsos, dated to the 3rd century BC, one is at the point where Cypriot sculpture in limestone has met the forces of late high classical carving in marble from Greece, the islands, or Western Asia Minor," end of quote. This head is so exceptional that I often wonder whether it might be the work of a foreign artist who applied his art to the carving of Cypriot limestone. It's just a thought. It is to me surprising that so little marble sculpture is found on Cyprus. Of course, the lack of local statuary marble played a major role in this. Other regions in similar situations enrich their buildings and necropolis with large quantities of imported marble, sculptures, sarcophagi in particular, and so on. Why the island, even during periods of prosperity like the Hellenistic one, when it was by no means poor, has so little to show in this respect remains puzzling. For reasons so far unknown, Cyprus seems to have remained outside the rules of organized marble trade. It was during the Roman period that the use of marble and colored stones reached its apogee throughout the empire. The use of exotic colored marbles reflected the power and glory as well as its extent, as well as the extent of the empire, with this prized commodity coming from the four corners of the world. Marble, both unworked in the form of quarry blocks and semi-finished or finished columns, capitals, sarcophagi, statues, basins, and all sorts of fittings, were circulating around the Mediterranean. From the 1st century AD onwards, there was a state organization for the collection and use of marble, which referred back to the emperor. The easiest way to transport such incredibly heavy material was by sea, and this is when the naves lapidariae, the boats used for these special transports, reached exceptional capacities. To give you an idea, the ship that was transported from, it is alleged that the ship that transported from Egypt to Rome, the 26-meter long or high obelisk that now stands in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican, was sunk and filled with concrete in order to create the foundations of the lighthouse of the port of Claudius at Ostia. So it must have been absolutely immense. This marble mania is also reflected in Cyprus. The number of imported marble statues increases, and one is impressed by what has come to light in the public buildings and wealthy residences of Curio, of Salamis, you see on the screen, Curio and Paphos. However, marble sculpture remains rare outside these large urban centers. Also, I find it curious that such luxurious residences, like the houses of Dionysus, of Aeon, of Orpheus, and so on, with their splendid mosaics and exuberant decoration, reflecting extraordinary wealth, have so little architecture or decoration in marble. Instead, they use local stone coated with a thick layer of plaster to make it look like marble, as here in the so-called Hellenistic house in Paphos, excavated by the Polish mission there, which unfortunately, after being reassembled and exhibited, or rather exposed to the public, has lost most of its original plaster coating. And this is what happens, of course, to all architecture of the kind left exposed. In this marble world, some stones were more or less reserved for Rome and for the emperor. The imperial stone par excellence was Egyptian porphyry from Jebel Tokhan, a stone already associated with power under the pharaohs and then the Ptolemies of Egypt. And of course, it continued to have this association in Byzantine times too. And while we have this picture on the screen, to give you an idea of what marble trade entailed, I mentioned that when the sarcophagus on the right was taken to the Vatican, it was it was loaded on a cart that was dragged by 40 oxen. So the weight is absolutely immense. Not surprisingly, red porphyry is extraordinarily rare on Cyprus. The largest pieces, still very small, that I know of are those re-employed in the opus sectile of the parts of the Campanopetra. As a matter of fact, the rare and highly priced Egyptian porphyries and granites are found mostly in Rome, reserved for use in the large public buildings and imperial residences. In Cyprus, in the past, it was assumed that the numerous columns of gray granite found throughout Paphos and elsewhere, Curio, all the big cities have these columns. It was believed that they were made of the famous Egyptian granite coming from Jebel Fatire, known as Granito del Foro. So here it is, known as Granito del Foro because the columns of the Forum of Trajan are made of it. However, close examination and study of the Cypriot material has shown that due to its characteristic pinkish mauve crystals and other characteristics, it is another precious granite, not Granito del Foro, but a granite coming from Troy, from the area of Troy in Asia Minor. Of the many types of granite quarried in Egypt, only the red granite of Aswan was used throughout the empire. But even this is rare on the island. The only substantial example I know being an ancient column reused in the 18th century archbishopric, now the Folk Art Museum in Nicosia. In the Basilica of Chrysobolidisa in Paphos, there is a single block reused, ancient block reused as a threshold, made of what I think is a rare ophiolite, also from Egypt, known as Granito della Sedie di San Pietro, so called because the pedestal of the bronze statue of St. Peter's in the Vatican is made of this stone. We will see more of the marbles used in Cyprus in a little while. But first, I would like to talk about a series of events that not only changed the course of history, but also the use of marble on the island. Mainly, the 4th century earthquakes that flattened, destroyed the cities of the island, and the well-organized trade of Procronisian marble in the 5th and 6th centuries. Up until the 4th century, for good quality stones, the island had to rely on imports. After the earthquakes of the 4th century, the Cypriots had, for the first time, readily available marble from the ruined, richly decorated public buildings and public and private buildings. Furthermore, this is also the period that Christianity is officially established on the island, and pagan temples were becoming redundant. Thus, the use of spolia became widespread. I already had occasion to mention several such cases of reuse, and we will see some more soon. Think of the splendid Basilica of Christobalidisa in Paphos, which is a hodgepodge of precious and beautiful marbles, some of them certainly coming from the nearby ancient theater. Up to this period, Cypriot mosaicists employed local limestones and glass paste for making their beautiful mosaics, since they would not waste expensive imported marble for cutting it up into little pieces. Now they could recycle all the broken architectural elements made and other marbles found around them with no particular expense. And thus, from this period on, and especially in later times, in the 5th and 6th century, mosaics use a lot of marble. I'm talking about Cyprus, of course. And of course, this is the period that opus sectile begins, for similar reasons, I believe, to be used on the island. And during the next century or so, create some of the most important examples of the art in the ancient world. And these I always find surprising, that there is no opus sectile in Cyprus in earlier times, and suddenly we go into these wonderful creations. The best examples come from the capital, that you see, and from the nearby site of Agios Philon with this incredible floor. But of course, all basilicas, or wealthy basilicas of the period, use opus sectile of less exuberant types, like the one you see on the screen from the Amathus Basilica. Another phenomenon we get in this period is the way that opus sectile and marble takes over in wealthy buildings, really sort of pushing mosaics into a secondary role, like in what you see on the screen. Give me a minute, because I think I mixed my pages. Yes. As you can see, in the Basilica of Chrysobolidisa, the beautiful mosaics with the famous allegorical representations, in the 6th century, they were covered up with opus sectile, of which only a small fragment survives, but it's there all the same. And this hierarchy is found in most important churches of the island. Here you see another example of this is the Baptistry of the Episcopal Basilica of Curio, Where mosaic is used, mosaic is now buried for protection under the sand all around, but in the main part of the hall of the baptistry, the floor is made of opus sectile. So this is one of the results of the earthquakes that made marble more readily available. The other factors that I mentioned in this change in the marble scene of Cyprus is the well-organized marble trade of the 5th and 6th centuries. Justinian, much like the Roman emperors before him, used marble in order to demonstrate his power, but now also his ability to reach any corner of the Mediterranean in his drive to promote Christianity within the empire. During his reign, the use of polychrome and white marble was organized in an unprecedented manner, and the quarries of Procronisios in the Sea of Marmara, which of course takes its name from these quarries, Marmara, being quite close to Constantinople, played a key role in this marble trade. The furnishings of entire basilicas, bases, columns, capitals, and all were prefabricated and shipped to different parts of the Mediterranean, ready to be reassembled into new Christian basilicas. Relative information is found in the written sources, such as the Miracles of St. Demetrios, from where we learn of a ciborium, an ambo, and columns of marbles intended for a given basilica, which were bought in Constantinople, loaded on a ship, and stashed in the ship's bow, wrapped in straw and lint. However, the best preserved evidence comes from shipwrecks dotted around the Mediterranean. Here you see some of them, there are more, of course. In Cyprus, this practice of importing whole mill marble decoration is best exemplified by the remains at Aios Georgios of Peia, where 4 basilicas and a baptistry were each decorated with a set of architectural elements and furnishings of Procronisian marble, each one in a different style. I mean, each basilica had a different style. Basilica A, the largest, aside from marble columns, bases, capitals, reliquaries, offering tables, and so on, also had an ambo, a pulpit, the best preserved in Cyprus, belonging to a well-known type in the early Byzantine world, like this example outside St. Sophia in Constantinople. On the Cypriot example, the curved parapets of the balcony at the top carry inscriptions, Hyperefis Nafton, one of them, and the other one, which is fragmentary, preserves the word soteria, salvation. Inscriptions related to the well-being, well-wishing, and salvation of sailors. And Charalambos Bagirtzis' ingenious interpretation of the site of Aios Georgios as a stopover for the ships carrying the Anona Kivica gives a plausible explanation to this unusual phenomenon of so much marble in this remote location. The ships, after unloading the wheat provisions, the wheat supply in Constantinople, would make their return journey loaded with finished marble finishings from the capital's workshops to unload during their route. Of interest in this connection of interest in the present discussion on marble in Cyprus is the information given to me by Peter McGaw of what led him to the discovery of these basilicas in 1949. He was informed that an ancient site was being devastated by blacksmiths from Paphos in what was then a remote and completely isolated part of the island, accessible only after a long and copious donkey ride. Somehow, the Paphian blacksmiths discovered the rich deposits of marble there, a material very much in demand in their profession, because in powder form, it was an excellent flux for the fusion of metals. And one wonders why they bothered to go all this way on really difficult track and carry the material back to Paphos if the ancient city was there in ruins. Obviously, marble was not readily available locally, or it had been exhausted. Also, this story explains why the site of Aios Georgios at Peia is littered with chips of Procronisian marble. This is what the result of what the blacksmiths were doing on the site, I think. Instead of ready-made material, instead of ready-made material imported wholesale, other very rich establishments made full use of recycled material, spolia. The already often mentioned Basilica of Christobalidisa in Paphos offers an excellent example. Together with the Campanopetra of Salamis Constantia, this is one of the largest basilicas in the Eastern Mediterranean, and it is clear that funding its decoration was no problem. It is certain that some of the marble used in it came from the nearby theater, where there are matching pieces. It would be wonderful to know where some of the other architectural pieces came from. The 4 columns of Trojan granite near the central apse, I think they're the largest in Cyprus, but I'm not sure. These 4 columns certainly form a set. So they must have come from somewhere used in this way. So do the columns of Cipollino in the inner southern aisle of the church. And not surprisingly, at Chrysobolidisa, there is a lot of Procronisian marble, easily recognizable by the beautifully layered aspect it has. But the rest is a mixture of marbles and styles, capitals of different types, bases of different types, columns of different types, and so on, which were used simply for their beauty and the way they reflect an extravagant, rich world. I have already mentioned the single block of the rare Granido della Setie di San Pietro. And here are 2 shaft fragments, probably belonging to the same column, of Cipollino Rosso coming from Iasos. Nearby, a still buried column of a breccia that I do not recognize. It is reminiscent of breccia corallina, but it is not quite right. There are several such small columns on Cypriot sites, and the common use of the same stone for tiles and sometimes wall veneering make me think that this might be the product of a local workshop, of a local quarry, which unfortunately has not been located. I have not seen the material that was excavated in Salamis, but I have never seen such richness and variety of marbles as those coming out of the earth when Athanasios Papageorgiou was excavating the Basilica of Chrysobolidisa. The material is now in storage, but you can get an idea of that, of what there is there, although it is not the best examples, from the small sections of opus sectile that survive on the site. Here you see a variety of marbles from Greece, Algeria, Asia Minor, and of course, there are more. Chrysobolidisa is exceptional. Elsewhere, even well-furnished sites like Aios Philon, Curio, Amathus, the opus sectile there is predominantly made with a yellowish limestone, and the exotic marbles or the imported marbles are used like jewels, really, within this mainly yellow background. Given the enormous quantity of this material and its large use in opus sectile floors, one could say that, or one says that this is probably a local stone. But again, the quarries have not been located. Furthermore, there are similar stones in nearby Asia Minor, but as I said, a lot of work needs to be done on the provenance of this stone. With the end of the ancient world, the marble trade came to an end. In Cyprus, burning the marble for lime, destroyed the largest part of what was there. But through the ages that followed, marble was used as spolia, mainly for specific purposes. During the Lusignan period and later on in the Renaissance, ancient Procronisian columns were sliced lengthwise in half to be used as tombstones, like the one you see here of Madame Cécile Lechien, found in Paphos. During the Gothic period and later, we find marble used simply to highlight architecture made of local stone. I don't know if anybody has studied this material, and I know Nicolas Coureas is following the lecture. I don't know if he has any information on this, but I would love to know if during the Lusignan and Venetian period, there is information on the import of marble on Cyprus. The Venetians knew much about marble, but in Cyprus, they recycled ancient columns like you see here in the Palazzo del Proveditore, in Famagusta, and of course, the column marking the center of Nicosia, put there by the Venetians, also comes from Salamis. But the Venetians also imported sculpture in Cyprus, like the baldacchino you see here, which used to be in the Paphos Museum. Unfortunately, is not on show in the new museum, but hopefully we will be able to see it again when the second part of the museum is made. As you can see, the baldacchino is made of stone, which is not local, but it's also decorated with inlays, the most recognizable of which, or rather the most beautiful of which, is the brocatello triangles in the pediment, stone that comes from Spain. During the Ottoman period, churches recycled ancient marble. This is the facade of the exonathics of the Cathedral of Nicosia, where we have Trojan columns, and of course the Buyuk Khan, the most beautiful of the Khans of Nicosia, also recycled column shafts and capitals, as you can see in the photograph. I always wonder, but I don't know the answer, whether during the Ottoman period, marble from Procronisia was again imported in Cyprus. There is a lot of it used mostly for funerary monuments, which are clearly not all recycled. This must be material that came from Turkey during the Ottoman period. Here you see some examples on the right from the cemetery in Kyrenia, and here you see some more. And of course, when we come to the modern contemporary period, even the Cyprus Museum utilizes marble. When it was built in the early 20th century, it is built of beautiful local stone, but the facade is imported marble from Greece. So, geologists have shown that there is marble in Cyprus, white and colored marble. I hope I have shown that the white marble we see on the island is imported and later recycled, but imported. Colored marbles feature more or less the same. So we can be sure that this trade in marble was continued, and we've seen that it also went the other way around, that some marble from Cyprus was re-exported, like the sarcophagus you see, which went to the Vienna Museum. But also in the Sea of Salamis, there are hexagonal marble fragments, clearly from an opus sectile at the bottom of the sea. And the question is, were they on the way to Cyprus or the way from Cyprus? We don't really know. So I think that local marble was used in antiquity, mostly in its colored versions, for small cruste, for opus sectile, and sometimes veneering. All the beautiful marbles we see around come from abroad. I don't exclude that there are also beautiful Cypriot stones, but the ones that are easily identifiable are all well-known types found throughout the ancient world. So the question is still open. It's still an ongoing discussion. Is a Cypriot marble? And when I ask myself this question, is a Cypriot marble? I answer, yes, there is Cypriot marble, but most of the artifacts we see are made of non-Cypriot stones. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this fascinating lecture, dear Dimitris. It was exceptional, and I am sure that enabled a lot of us to enrich our knowledge about the existence and the use or the import of marble in ancient Cyprus. I am sure there will be a lot of questions, and I would like to encourage our colleagues, if they would like to ask questions in English, Greek, Italian, they are most welcome. Andreas Foulias.
Well, hi everybody. Thank you, Dimitris, for this indeed fascinating lecture. I'd like to ask Dimitris, of course, about Chrysobolidisa, about the four columns, the four granite columns. Did you say from where they are coming from? I had the impression that they were coming from Egypt, because granite we can find in Egypt. Is that correct?
No, this is what used to be, and is still generally thought. It is not Egyptian granite, it's granite from Troy, from Asia Minor. And they have been studied by Thorpe Williams together with the columns from Saranda Colones and elsewhere, and the Agora in Paphos. And they are all made of this Asia Minor granite. It's very good, but it's not as good as a Granito del Foro, as a gray granite.
Okay.
Sorry, Foulias, do you have any more?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Tassos Papakostas, good evening.
Thank you. I had a related question, since we are with the Egyptian or non-Egyptian granite. Dimitri, the columns you showed on the facade of the Palazzo del Provveditore at Famagusta, and the twin columns opposite, so they're all from Famagusta, from Salamis.
Mm-hmm.
Are they also Trojan granite, or are they something else?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Like
okay.
the one in Nicosia, which also comes from Famagusta, from Salamis.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And a second question related to this later reuse of things. You showed the baldacchino from Paphos, from the Latin cathedral, presumably. So you did say it is stone with incrustation in what did you call it? Brocadello.
Brocadello, yes.
Yeah. So, and both the brocadello and the stone are imported. Is that, did I understand you correctly?
Well, the whole thing is imported from northern Italy, it is assumed. The stone is very compacted. The angels are made of stone, very compact stone, very different from Cypriot stone. The wings of the angels are made of terracotta.
Yeah,
but the actual, the roof of the baldacchino, which is made of stone, is encrusted with the exotic marbles like the Brocadello, which of course went to Italy from Spain, from Tortosa.
Okay, all right. And one point about your question regarding importation of marble in the Venetian period. I mean, as far as I'm aware, there is no sort of clear evidence there. What one finds in the sources is sort of the odd mention of carved stone being imported, but of what type and for what purpose is not clear at all. At least there is, I think there may be some Istrian carved stone being imported, but presumably for small scale things. And then the reuse of Procronisian, I mean, the Bedestan, the Greek cathedral of Nicosia during the Venetian period is full of, as you know, lintels and frames made of reused, I assume, Procronisian marble. So there's obviously a clear sort of appreciation of that, and a lot of it.
A lot of it, yes. And it's a strong marble, so it was very popular. But I would like to know on another occasion the sources you mentioned, the mentions of especially if the stone is Istrian. We should look for Istrian. We should look for Istrian stones in Cyprus.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I can send you a few references. Okay, thanks a lot. That was brilliant, by the way.
Some messages. Yes, Mr. Pachalis. Sorry, Evdoxia.
Dimitri, thank you very much for this very interesting lecture. Really, it's congratulations.
Thank you.
I had no idea about so many details concerning marbles in Cyprus. And my question is, if anybody is doing now analysis of marbles because you told us that there have been the analysis of this Trojan coming from Troya, this granite. Do you know if now is in going on project on this analysis?
No, that I'm aware of. We've been talking with Frini Hadji-Christofi and some other colleagues about starting a project. And in fact, with Frini, some years back, we started cataloging the columns in Paphos in particular and Curio to see if they form a modulus, for their size, and because it's very interesting to see how they do fit together.
Exactly.
Because they are products of workshops. So, workshops follow modules. They don't do things randomly. But it's something we started a long time ago, and it's there. I would love to be able to continue before it's too late.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Federico.
My congratulations for the splendid conference of Dimitri. Very, very interesting for us because normally Cyprus is considered for many things, but not for the marble. Dimitri resumed very well all the remains of the marble existing in Cyprus. I was curious to know if there is some indication for the because the Procronisian marble is used in Rome in the time of the 2nd century, and so is always more and more. But in Cyprus, only with the 6th century there is some evidence of that.
As far as I know, there is no. I can hear an echo. That's why I stopped. As far as I know, there is no dated material before the early Christian period. It's when we get it used in the churches and the basilicas, but also in the Villa of Theseus that the Polish mission has excavated. There is quite a lot of Procronisian marble, but of course the villa has late phases, so it's probably from the later phases.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, and Nicolas.
We cannot hear you.
Nicolas, you have to press unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you can.
Yes.
Now.
Okay. Now you made the you forwarded the question about possible
To you specifically. Yes.
Yes. To me specifically, I'm trying to answer it. Now, about the possible importation of marble to Cyprus during the Cyclic period. I am not aware of the importation, but the best person to ask is your former colleague Michaelides Olympios, who, as you know, has a lot of work on Gothic architecture in Cyprus, especially church architecture. He may have some information, okay, on this point. The other point I wish to make is that you mentioned the possible import of Procronisian marble into Cyprus during the Offspring period. There was a conference on the Famagusta held in Budapest in 2012. The proceedings came out in 2014, and one of the people who gave a conference on Famagusta, and one of the scholars who gave a talk was a young Turkish Cypriot doctoral student. I can't remember his name, but he gave a very detailed talk on how during the Ottoman period, Procronisian marble from the Procronisians was imported to Cyprus, and a lot of those gravestones which he pointed out, I think they're from the Arab Ahmed area of Nicosia, are made from imported marble imported from the Procronisians during the Ottoman period.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to have this reference. I mean, this was my
I'll send it to
impression.
you. Yes, I'll send it.
I was sure all those Ottoman tombstones, etc., could not be recycled marble, that it must have been imported from Procronisius. So excellent to have an article on it. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, I'll send you the reference.
Thank you.
Hello, may I ask a question?
Yes,
But show us your face, Yolanda.
of course.
Yeah. Γεια σου Δημήτρη, ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Εγώ
Δεν
ευχαριστώ.
μπορώ να... Λοιπόν, τι ήθελα να ρωτήσω, στην βίλα, in the villa of Jesus, we had this marble revetment. Do you have it in the house of Orpheus? My question is, when it begins, you know, the revetting the walls of the Roman houses with marbles?
Well, the evidence I know comes from the late period, because of course the earlier houses do not survive in such good way. I'm not aware of any marble in any quantity from the house of Dionysus, and there is certainly no marble revetment surviving in the house of the Four Seasons or Orpheus. In fact, in the house of Orpheus, the marble fragments of any sort are only a handful. Okay, they were probably recycled and burned in the lime kilns of Paphos, of which you know there are hundreds. But still, it is surprising that so little survives. Where you do have remnants of marble revetment, and if you let me, I think I may have a photograph, but I didn't have time to show everything I put to show you. You see it here, the revetment. This is at Curio. It's again Procronisian marble, and what survives, it's what was left after it was smashed in order to take the larger bits to the lime kiln. And these bits, since they are built into the mortar, they couldn't pull out, so they survive. And but all the examples like this that I know of are late, not of the Roman houses we know. The villa, of course, of the villa of Theseus uses a lot of marble, and there are several examples like this of the stumps of slabs against the wall, but they are all from the later phase of the building. Is that the question?
So we may say that, yes, we may tell that you know the marble revetting was a late Roman practice in Cyprus, or?
Well, when marble was more readily available.
Yeah.
It's certainly not in earlier times when marble is rare, and they would only import artifacts like statues and things, precious things.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I would like to ask something.
Yes, please.
So, Dimitri, thank you very much. It was a really excellent talk. My question has to do with any indications about the social patterns of the use of marble, for example, in statuary or in monuments in the Roman and late Roman period. Any mentions in inscriptions about the use of marble portrait, for example, or any other information that gives us some hints about who was able and capable of using marble for public
for public monuments? This is my first question. And the second question, you emphasized the extensive use of spolia in the Chrysobolidisa in Paphos, but you didn't elaborate so much on the same subject, referring to Salamis. Can you say anything about a comparison between the two sites and any observations from a historical or economic point of view regarding the use or the reuse of monuments or material in these two important cities? Thank you.
Well, starting from the second part of the question, I knew somebody would ask the question, what about Salamis? I have not talked much about Salamis because I don't know the site. I know Paphos Kurion very well. My knowledge of Salamis goes back to a long time ago. And even in recent visits, I haven't really looked at the evidence of marble. This is something we've been talking with Paschalis Papapetru of doing, going back to Salamis and looking at it the way we looked at Paphos, but it's yet to be done. However, there is a similar situation from what I can see, the situation is similar. And even when you think of the columns of the gymnasium of Salamis, they're again a hodgepodge. They are not uniform. The capitals don't fit. You know, they are made up things simply because the material is precious. They are not made to order. So I think the situation is similar. And you saw, of course, I showed the opus sectile from the Campanopetra. And as you know, the Campanopetra is just a glory of marble. Everything there is marble, but again, it's late. But it's interesting when you are talking about Salamis, if you look at Agios Epiphanios, which was built before Campanopetra. Agios Epiphanios, of course, is one of the most important basilicas in Cyprus, very large, but it's made of stone. The columns are made of local stone. But when we get to the slightly later period, when marble is imported through Procronisius, Campanopetra, as I said, is a glory of Procronisian marble and others, but Procronisian in particular. So I think it's an interesting comparison to make with what happens in the 5th century, early on, or 4th century, late 4th century, early 5th century, with what happens in the late 5th century and 6th century. There's a big change even in Salamis. What was the first part? About inscriptions. No, the answer is no. Of course, there are inscriptions mentioning such and such that such a statue was put up by Ptolemy or somebody in the hierarchy of a city. But as far as I can remember now, these inscriptions are found on statue bases that carried bronze statues, like all those we have in Palepaphos, for example, in the sanctuary. So we don't have the statues. And the evidence is for this, I can't think of the word, axiomatouchi, this high-ranking people, to put up statues in bronze. For marble statues, I'm not aware, but of course, what is indicative is the fact that important inscriptions are always written on marble. When you think of the gigantic inscription that in Paphos that came from the theater excavations. That is a gigantic imperial inscription in solid marble. So yes, that I think is a reflection of importance in the ranking of stones, that big imperial inscriptions are written in marble.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mrs. Elisopoulou.
Thank you, Dimitri. I enjoyed it very much, and I tried to absorb as much as I could. It seems that the use of marble in Cyprus is a very good example of realization of the idea of reuse and recycling. You persuaded us. And now, do not laugh when I put my question. I would like to ask you whether you found out about the provenance of marble in the house of Hadjigeorgakis, because I have three cases there: the marble plaque above the entrance with the lion, the other plaque with the monogram and the date inside, and the marble fountain, of course, 1803.
Okay, let me see if I can find it. I think I put it, I was going to say something about it, but I didn't. There. Sorry, I did not even sort out the slides. This is about the entrance. I think it's reused marble, recarved. I don't know, but that's
it's
what
the
I
third
think.
use in Hadjigeorgakis.
Sorry?
Because the lower part is even earlier, the part
Yeah.
with the lion is second phase, and the use of Hadjigeorgakis house is third. But I'm talking about the material. I'm asking.
The stone looks like Procronisian. I have not looked at it close up because it's very high, as you know, but from the photographs, it looks like Procronisian marble. The fountain inside, which, sorry, you can just glimpse under the arch of the door.
With this gray marble.
I
yes.
think it's Greek island marble, but I don't know. I'm not sure, but that's what it looks like.
And there is the other one similar to the fountain above the entrance inside.
Yeah. I don't know about the last bit you mentioned, but
okay, we'll go together.
The fountain looks like the sort of thing you get from Greek islands in more recent times, not antiquity.
Okay.
But we need to look at it properly.
Thank you. We'll do it.
Dimitri, another question. You didn't mention the marble of Thessaly, the Thessalian marble, the green marble that is always associated in the shipwrecks and in the church in general with the Procronisian. You didn't find any fragment of that in Cyprus?
The reason I didn't mention it, although it's a wonderful marble, is because there is very little in Cyprus, and it's used for tiles, mostly, for opus sectile. You can see a fragment. Can you see my cursor? Yes.
Yes.
You see, that's a piece of Thessalian marble there. There isn't very much in Cyprus because, as you know, in small pieces, it's very weak and it breaks up very easily. It's very friable. And you can see even this piece here that it's cracked throughout.
But the columns all over the Mediterranean, it's full of columns of Thessalian marble in the churches, but in Cyprus, no one.
Oh. And of course, in the shipwreck of Marzameni, the ambo, which is similar to the one in Panathos, in Aios Georgios, there the ambo is made of Thessalian marble. But when you get them in such big pieces, it is strong. When it is in thin slices, like the tiles here, it's too weak and it breaks.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Any other questions? Dimitri, I am sure you have in mind the columns in the deambulatoire of Hagia Sophia in Nicosia, but they are covered by mortar or paint. I assume they would be granite columns reused from other sites. Do you know them? Did you have the chance to study them?
No, I don't know. No,
Yeah.
I don't know if Olympios has looked at them, but I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. It's another case to be studied.
There's
Any-
a lot to study.
Yes. No, you gave us the occasion to know a lot of things tonight. Let me read some messages from the chat. Παναγιώτα Παπαδοπούλου, καλησπέρα σε όλους. Nadia Χαραλαμπίδου, congratulations. Yolanda Mlinashik, thank you for your brilliant lecture. Olga Φιλανιώτου, brilliant, thank you. Κυριακή Κουτσανδρέα, ευχαριστούμε θερμά για την εξαιρετική παρουσίαση. Αλέξιος Γκολόβκο, εξαιρετική παρουσίαση, ευχαριστούμε. George Papasabas, excellent talk, Dimitri, great research and so much information, thank you. Anthea Andronikou, thank you so much for such a fascinating talk. Tony Kozel, thanks for the great presentation. I would like to know if you think that the Procronisian marble is not imported before Justinian time. Well, a question here.
Well, this is similar to Federico's question. I don't know of dated examples before the sort of 5th, 6th century use of the Procronisian marble. I'm not excluding it, but I don't know.
Μαρία Πατέρα, ευχαριστούμε πολύ για την πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα παρουσίαση. Μιχαήλ Παπατσάτσης, thank you, ευχαριστούμε. Μαρία Γιάννου, συγχαρητήρια. Βασιλική Τζεμπέλικου, σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ για την εξαιρετική παρουσίαση. Αντώνης Γενναδίου, πολλά συγχαρητήρια και θερμές ευχαριστίες. Βασιλική Κασιανίδου, πολύ ωραία Δημήτρη, ευχαριστούμε. Katerina Kutsumani, thank you for your outstanding presentation. I look if there is any question.
Well, you don't need to read them all.
Yes, if there is any question, maybe. I don't see any more. Yes. Okay. Any other questions or comments? No? Well, I would like to thank you once more, Dimitri, for this very interesting and rich lecture, and hope to have another time the occasion to hear you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
and Yorgos
Dimitri.
also for inviting me. Thank you. And thank you to all the people that attended. Thanks.
Thanks to everybody for your attendance. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.